And I'm now joined by my colleague Marcos Watts from Sao Paulo. Marcos, I was going to say, how's it going? But I know you're Brazilian. You're out of the World Cup, so it's probably not going well.
Yeah. Hey, first of all, hey Manu, nice to be here. Yeah, it's not my favorite day of the week, Mondays, and today feels like an even worse Monday, I would say.
Yeah, heavy. I watched the game on my way back from Houston, where I covered Canada's defeat to Morocco, and I watched in disbelief as Erling Haaland did Erling Haaland things. Bruno Guimarães missing a penalty, Neymar scoring a late penalty, and still it wasn't quite enough for Brazil. Maybe before we get into the weed of things, what was your instant reaction when this all went down?
Yeah, I mean, watching the game, you felt like the first 15 minutes or so were crazy. Everyone really wanted to win that match. But after Brazil conceding a goal that got out of the way and Norway being safe from a penalty, I think both teams got a bit scared and they saw like, all right, we could be out of the World Cup today. So let's try and not risk everything at once here, and let's try to play our games. And at the end of the day, I think Norway's game was better, and Brazil couldn't create enough. Brazil couldn't play the way they wanted to play, and it was harder to defend Norway than the other way around. So, I mean, it's gutting for Brazil. It felt very hard at the end. Watching Neymar score, watching Neymar fight the Norway team. Yeah, it was disappointing in general terms, I think.
What do you think the reason for this exit was? Do you think it's a squad selection? Did Carlo Ancelotti ultimately maybe did get it wrong there?
Yeah, I mean that's been a huge topic in Brazil since the selection. It's tough to leave players like João Pedro out, for example, and then you reach the World Cup round of 16 and you say, okay, we don't have the top scorer that we need. Of course, Vini was playing great and he was scoring the goals for Brazil, but it felt like we missed a number 9, a proper number 9, and Cunha did well, but he never felt like the real number 9. Because of the way he plays, basically because he can play as a midfielder as well. It sort of felt like Brazil missed the number 9, like the good old number 9s that we had in the past. And not to blame Ancelotti, not to blame the selection, but when you look back and you said, okay, we could have selected that player, or maybe this other guy would have been better than this guy that we took. It's really complicated, but I think that's for anyone who gets eliminated from the World Cup. Just look back and you said, all right, what could I have done better? And it's hard, it's complicated, but I think now is the time to sit back, watch the rest of the World Cup, think about the future, and not mourn much of the past, I would say.
Yeah, the worst result for Brazil in 36 years at the World Cup. The South American Germany, Marcos, is the thought that came to my mind. There's a lot of good players in the squad, but maybe not the world class players that you need to be competitive at the highest level. And when I watched this Brazil game, and I watch Erling Haaland, and this has been a tournament of the superstars, hasn't it? I think that is the thing that really sticks out. That like Erling Haaland, Kylian Mbappe, Leo Messi, these guys are just scoring goals and goals and goals and goals. And like it's very much been a tournament for your number 9s, and free flowing and direct and fast and attacking and powerful in some ways as well. And then Carlo brings on Neymar, and we talked about that selection before the tournament. And you mentioned João Pedro already, right? When you think that is your option, and he immediately comes on and misplays the ball twice and just seems so totally out of place. This surely must be the end for him at this Brazil squad.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was always the plan to bring Neymar on sometime during the game, and that's been the plan for Brazil. Whenever Neymar is available, if he can play 10 minutes, he's going to play 10 minutes. If he can play the whole game, he'll play the whole game. And yeah, I think at the end of the day, that was Ancelotti trying. I mean, you have a player like Neymar on the bench, and if you lose a game and you get eliminated from the World Cup without trying to play what's potentially your best player, I mean, how would that feel? So I think at the end of the day, Ancelotti was trying, and it didn't really work. I don't know if that was how it was supposed to have gone anyways, but yeah, the Neymar's performance was quite disappointing despite scoring the penalty goal. I think the Brazilian fans expected a lot more from him, and from the team in general. I think we couldn't play the way we wanted to, and yeah, at the end of the day, really the team that played best won. There's not much to be said about that, and about being the end for Neymar after the game, obviously very emotional. He went into one of the global reporters and he said, "That's it for me, for Brazil. I'm done. I started here, I end here." And yeah, let's see. Looks like it's the end for him with the Brazil kit, but if that's the end of the story, it was a great story for Neymar. He becomes Brazil's top scorer all time. He's the second player to play most games for Brazil national team. So, I mean, it's just sad that he never won the World Cup. That felt like it was always the main goal for him and for Brazil. And but yeah, that's a big part of Neymar's career. That's a big part of Neymar's story. He almost achieved great things that slipped away in the last second, I think.
Need to talk about Carlo too, I think. No foreigner has ever won a World Cup with a country, right? That's something to also think about, I think, if you're English, that no foreign coach has ever won a World Cup, and probably also why Germany went for Jurgen Klopp rather than Pep Guardiola in their hunt to replace the coach. But we need to talk about Carlo. I mean, obviously such a class act. One of the most successful coaches in the history of the game. And he's said he will continue, but will he, Marcus?
Hopefully he does. Honestly, if you ask me, if no foreign manager has won the World Cup, that's just until now. One day that's probably going to change. And if you ask me, Ancelotti is the man that could change that, and Brazil is the country that could win the World Cup with a foreign manager. I mean, he's one of the greatest of all time. That's out of discussion, I think. And he's been doing a good job. And let's not forget that he's only been in the command of the Brazil national team for a year now. He didn't have much time to prepare. The national team was a mess before he got there. So give him time. He's one of the greats. He knows what to do. He's been already doing a good job. I think you may question his national team selection, but whoever you are, you have to admit that Brazil had been playing good and better than most people expected, I think, during the World Cup. I know the fans are going to get emotional. The fans are going to get complacent about Brazil not winning it because that's what you expect from Brazil. Every World Cup, you just hope they win. But at the end of the day, you have to be critical and you have to analyze that Brazil played well with the pieces they had. They've done what they could have done, and a lot of that is a part of Ancelotti doing a good job. So I mean, Brazil is probably the biggest talent factory in the world football. And if we're talking about looking at the next World Cup 4 years from now, we're going to have good players. We know we're going to have good players. We have good talents like Endrick, like Estêvão, like Haaland, which is they're going to be ready for the next World Cup, hopefully. and we're going to have new leadership. We have, for example, I think Gabriel is going to be 30 something. So it's going to be a mix of players who are in the squad, who are going to remember how you felt, that bitter feeling of getting eliminated from a World Cup where you felt like you could have done better. And it's going to be a new upcoming batch of talent to join them. And hopefully it's going to be a better World Cup for Brazil next time. And hopefully still with Carlo Ancelotti in command. I think he's a good enough manager to be able to, in long term, create that project that you need to win a World Cup. And to me, honestly, it doesn't really matter if he's not Brazilian. He's there to do his job, and he really knows how to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the list of most valuable U23 Brazilian players in the world right now, and Estêvão is the most valuable. He was not in the squad. Ryan is second with 60 million euros. He was in the squad. Then it's André Santos from Brazil, from Chelsea, who was not in the squad. Wesley from Roma, he was also not in the squad, right? Endrick, also with 40 million, he was in the squad. Victor Roque, sorry, he was not in the squad, but he's also up there. You know, he's still only 21, which is something I think a lot of people forget. And then, if I correct me if I'm wrong, but Savinho was also not in the squad, and he's also on that list of most valuable players. And then you go down, you have Vitor Reis, Alisson Santos, and then Kevin, the left winger from Fulham. Those are players that I currently have on the U23 list. And Vitor Reis is 20, Endrick 19, Ryan 19, Estêvão 19. So there is talent there, right, Marcos?
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about Brazil in football, there's always talent. There's not a year that goes by that Brazil doesn't produce a great player or a player that has potential to become great. So, I mean, it's not going to stop because Brazil was defeated and eliminated from the World Cup. It's not the end of the world. We're going to have chances in the next few World Cups, but I think the moment is right for Brazil to have a good talk with Ancelotti now and say, okay, how do you want to do it for the next World Cup? You tell us how you want to do it, and we're going to follow your plan. Brazil is going to have the talent. Brazil is always going to have the talent. If there's one country in the world that always gets to a World Cup with chances of winning it, is Brazil. And yeah, hopefully they're going to develop that talent, and it's going to be a good squad, more prepared squad, more playing football in the way Ancelotti wants to be played. And it's going to be a much better Brazil in the next World Cup. I reckon that this one, I think if Ancelotti had a bit more time, Brazil would have been better. I'm not saying Brazil would have won the World Cup, but I think you have to give managers time to develop the team the way they want to play football. And now that Ancelotti is going to have time and he's going to have the talent as well, I mean, it's going to be. I mean, Brazilian fans can have high hopes for the next World Cup, I say.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably going to be a few players who are not longer going to be there. We mentioned Neymar. Marquinhos is another one, right? I think there's a question mark around him. And then Casemiro, of course, who is going to head to Inter Miami. I assume once he plays in MLS, he's no longer going to be part of the conversation. But so these are three players that when I look at the squad, that are probably no longer going to be part of the conversation for the next 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, looking forward 4 years, they're probably going to be in an age that either one of them gets selected to be like a leadership in the team, sort of a similar role to what Danilo had this year for Brazil. They could even get to play like Danilo did, but I think that Brazil is going to have new leadership for years to come now, and it's going to be a different mix than what the squad we had now. And that's part of football. I mean, the cycles go by, and Neymar, obviously, if he leaves the national team, he's not going to be in the next World Cup, and he had his chances, and unfortunately, he didn't win. Now we have to hope that the next few group of players have more success than Neymar's Brazil had. And that's the same for Casemiro. That's the same for Marquinhos. We're talking about big players, legends that unfortunately didn't win. You don't get to win every time. It's not going to be every legendary player that gets to be a World Cup champion. And that's how life goes on. That's how football goes on. And hopefully the next leadership can prepare the youngsters to do a better job.
Absolutely. Well, Marcos, head up. You still got England. I know you're a dual citizen, so hopefully England for you can revenge Brazil against Norway. It's always a huge pleasure to talk to you. We're going to do this very soon again. Hopefully a more positive topic next time.
Yeah, thank you. It's always a pleasure to be here, and let's keep watching the World Cup. Whatever happens now could be very exciting.
Absolutely. Absolutely.